profit? Is there, you know, where is the next growth machine? Bill Clinton, I heard him make a very persuasive argument that green economy is the place where you can grow jobs. I don't know. I'm not an economist. I don't know if that's true. But the question is your question is the most important question, I think, which is how can we go about growing the economy? And we haven't really done a good job as far as the middle class is concerned for at least the last decade.
I'm going to take the liberty of commenting on your question to me and your question to Mike Lewin. Thanks for mentioning Graham Rudman Hollings, which was supposed to be a structural fix or a strategy to balance the budget. Interesting to point out that that was part of one of the debt limit increases during the Reagan years. The argument coming from the administration is that these increases are always clean. They're just routine increases. But in fact, there was serious discussion and concern about our growing deficit, and there was substantive legislation attached to raising the limit. Why did it fail? I can't remember the details sharply, but the essence is that politicians are very poor stewards of spending issues because political pressure, until recently, political pressure is almost always for more spending. And politicians like to buy votes, and politicians like to favor constituencies, and politicians don't like the howls of distress that come back from constituencies whose gravy is thinned. You asked about productivity, and I'm going to have to refer to my chart quickly. Number one, when the next boom comes, it won't result from politicians identifying the strategic area of the economy to solve or to stimulate. It will come from free people, supply and demand, producers, investors, consumers, and the flow of freedom with people trying to make better conditions and lives for themselves, and boom, things start to develop. Number two, we've had 2 periods of rapid economic growth in modern American history, or in recent history. One in the 60s, starting with the John F. Kennedy rate cuts, and the other launched by the Reagan rate cuts in the 80s that continued through Bill Clinton. I don't remember the 60s because I was too young. Mike doesn't remember the 60s because he was just right. But we can look at the numbers and see that it's a lighter government hand and rate cuts and essentially an unleashing of the economy that drives that productivity. I'm going to quickly make that point with reference to a chart here. The class warriors always want to get more money by raising tax rates. In fact, tax rates are almost irrelevant to the ultimate haul that government gets. This bottom line is tax revenue as a percentage of gross domestic product from 1950 to 2005. These numbers come from the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, but they're put together in a chart prepared by the Heritage Foundation. This top line represents marginal tax rates from the 80-something in 1950 up to above 90%. Then it drops some. There are the Kennedy rate cuts in the 60s down to here. This is the top income tax bracket. What's important and remarkable is that the money coming into the government is essentially the same, around sometimes a little below 20%, sometimes a little above 20%. The rates are almost irrelevant. They do 2 or 3 things. Number one, high rates are usually accompanied by lots of exemptions and deductions and industrial policy by politicians because they love to dangle bait where they think investors should invest. And number two, high rates drive avoidance. So you do things offshore or you shelter your income or whatever, but the point is high rates don't produce high revenues. Revenues remain largely constant. What does drive higher revenues? Productivity, you pointed out. Here, let me show this to Mike. So, rates, no matter what the rates do, the level of revenue to government is largely steady. What does drive revenues to government? And this is really kind of heresy for a conservative because if you're not wanting government to get a lot more revenue, this is sort of letting the cat out of the bag. But what drives revenues to government is a growing economy. In fact, what this chart shows, is revenues to government relative to gross Thank you. Revenues to government relative to gross domestic product. And what this shows is when the economy grows, revenues to government grow, regardless of tax rates. Early on, the rates were up here. Later on, they dropped down to here. But the thing that brought money into government coffers was a growing economy, which is why an administration led by Barack Obama will never appreciate substantial gains in revenues because they'll never know how to spur a growing economy.
Well, as you said, the government doesn't spur the economy. The entrepreneurs spur the economy, so I don't know why Obama would have anything to do with one way or the other. During the 1960s, when the economy took off, of course, was the beginning of the Lyndon Johnson big Great Society, as it was called, and we had huge growth in our economy at the exact same time. So I wonder why the growth in government is not the issue here. It's the growth in revenue, as my friend was talking about. We had huge growth in the 90s. So why did we have huge growth in the 90s? It's you know, when he talks about it's the people, the entrepreneurs, the people who create the businesses and the jobs, and that's where the revenue comes from. I don't know anybody who disagrees with that. I don't know anybody who disagrees with that. Anyone. And that includes Barack Obama. Barack Obama, the friend to Wall Street, who you know, who his whole Treasury cabinet is full of Wall Street people. There's, you know, every liberal worries that Barack Obama is enthralled to Wall Street. So
do conservatives.
Well, okay. But it's hard to be anti-business and enthralled to Wall Street.
Being in favor of corporate statists is not the same thing as being in favor of the free market and the free economy. Anyway, just a quick comment.
You're against the Wall Street guys?
Oh yeah, I'm against the cozy relationship between the Wall Street guys and the administration.
You were for it when Bush was involved?
Oh no, I wasn't. I hate corporate statism. Bob Rubin, the revolving door, Jeffrey Einfeld.
You're not mentioning Republicans.
At GE.
You're not mentioning Republicans.
Jeffrey Einfeld at GE. What I like is a free economy that relies on supply and demand and free people, not a planned economy that relies on cozy.
We don't have a planned economy.
Oh my goodness.
We do not have a planned economy.
Okay.
Are there any other questions before we? Okay, now we've got a lot of them. Some.
Mr. Lippman.
Yes.
I can understand why you got a B minus.
What did you get?
And primarily.
What did you get?
I know you didn't have milk free.
I'm asking you what you got.
Mine's immaterial.
I didn't go to the University of Chicago, so I didn't have milk free. No. I went to the University of Virginia.
Yeah, because Bill Freeman would have flunked you. Because he wouldn't talk to you that crap. He didn't. But, you know, you did a very fine job of explaining, in fact, hammering home the very big point that if we default next month, that this economy is going to go to hell, the whole world is going to go to hell. So, explain to me, if you will, why it is that Barack Obama is willing to risk that default for the sake of taxing a few rich people.
Well, I don't think he is willing to risk that.
That's exactly what tax increases are.
There have to be the bills have to come out of the Congress. That's what the tax increase. No, that's not bloviating. Am I wrong on this? Sean, tell me if I'm wrong.
It's right, Congress obviously has to pass the spending measures, which is the point I should have made earlier about Clinton's job creation. The economy really took off after he lost his Democratic Congress. But it's also true that Barack Obama says he won't accept Republican proposals and conditions on raising the debt limit, so he's playing poker every bit as much as the Republicans are.
Yeah, but the Congress has to pass or not pass. So, I mean, they're the ones that put the pressure on Barack Obama. It's just not, Barack Obama doesn't get to say unilaterally one way or the other.
Who's the leader of the Democratic Party?
I'm not arguing that with you. What I'm saying is that for you to be right, then Barack Obama has to end up, the Congress has to end up either passing or not passing the debt limit. So, and I don't think they're going to.
I think the fair
I mean, I'm not sure they're going to.
I think the fair point he's making, though, is that there are two sides in this debate. To the extent we can discern what the presidency is, he won't accept the Republican positions. The Republican House, at least, won't accept the president's. So it's unfair to put all responsibility for this game of chicken on House Republicans.
Yes, that's fair. I mean, there's two sides. There's two sides to this. But if the debt ceiling is often, as I think Sean will concede, there have been times when something has been connected to the debt ceiling. It was basically usually been what they call a clean bill. So interestingly, Tom Tancredo, Lynn Bartles asked Tom Tancredo the other day how he voted on the debt ceiling when he was in Congress during the Bush years, and he said that it was such an unimportant vote that he couldn't remember how he voted.
Times change.
Question down here.
Hey, I guess the first thing I'd like to say is thank you both for coming very prepared, facts and support for your positions. I think you've reminded all of us the power of two people with very different views civilly sitting down to discuss them. I thank you very much for that.
That's a nice note to end on, but do we have...
Yeah. I have a question for both. The first question for Mike is, you talked about your concerns about these programs that are going to have to be cut. So my question to you is, with the size of government and the size of the nanny state, when is enough enough? My question for Senator Mitchell is, with, as you pointed out, almost 50% now of people not being net taxpayers and receiving benefits from the government, how can Republicans who don't have the bully pulpit get a hold of this message and start to improve that 20% we hate Congress poll that's out there?
Let me answer Sean's question like he did mine. There's a lot of confusion over who pays federal income tax and who pays taxes. People who don't pay federal income tax still pay taxes. They pay a 6% payroll tax. They have a state income tax. Most people who don't work are trying to work, and I don't think you can say that our rise in unemployment from 5 point something to 9 point something is about people not wanting to work.
Well, it could be about extending unemployment benefits for 99 weeks.
You know what you get for unemployment benefits? I don't think you'd want to live on it. I have a lot of friends who lost their jobs at the Rocky Mountain News who would have been in desperate shape if they didn't have their unemployment benefits. And believe me, every single one of those people would still love to be working at the Rocky Mountain News.
And we wish they were.
I do. I definitely do. So, and now I've forgotten the question you had for me. Oh, when is enough enough? I think it's a great point, and I don't like the term nanny state, so not one I would use. But the idea, I think, particularly, what's driven our place that we are in this debt, and our medical care, Medicare and Medicaid have been two of the huge drivers and two of the things that really risk our economy. And I think they both need to be reformed. So I'm not against reform of those programs. I'm for the reform of those programs. And I think too, that a lot of times you sort of group all these things together, and there's a lot of these things are much more costly, and a lot of the things that people get hung up about are not particularly costly. So Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security is a sort of separate issue, but all three of those things need to be fixed, and I hope that we do. I'd love to see, one of the reasons I'm for the idea of grand bargain is because, as Sean knows much better than I, having been a politician for so much of his life, is that politicians are gutless and they won't do the right thing. And the reason, and many of the times when they do the right thing, is because they're in a large package that they can sell to multiple constituencies. And so I'm very much in favor of a grand bargain-like thing where both sides give something up and we all win.
I'm sorry, I'm going to flagrantly disrespect your question because I don't have a good answer to how we capture public attention and public opinion. So I'm going to make one other point, which I forgot to make, which is one of the reasons we're here at the brink, that we're so close to August 2nd, is that it has been a conscious strategy of the president, and not just the president in this instance, other politicians do it other times, but you manufacture urgency by deferring a problem up to a crisis, and then there's a big package, there's not time to debate, there's not time for members to read it, and you cram it through with leadership saying you have to do this. What makes things a little bit different now is the more engaged and concerned and resistant public, the grassroots awakening. But quite often, Mike says that big deals come together because there's momentum or because people consider a global step forward.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
I'm saying because politicians are gutless, and the only way you can make them is to give the politicians room so that they can say to their constituents that I compromised rather than I gave away the store.
Okay, I may have mischaracterized this explanation of the compromise, but what I'm saying is some of these big deals are actually driven more by a manufactured sense of urgency, and the president hasn't lifted a finger. It obviously wasn't on his radar screen when it was 35 minutes into the State of the Union address before he mentioned debt. I went through the history of his utter neglect of the issue until now, and he wants the limit raised, and he wants it raised without strings.
Do you, Sean, think that the compromise, the Gang of Six idea that's being floated as this compromise, could you accept that at the end of the day? Mike's down there, he's saying, I can accept the cuts to entitlement programs. Can you accept the things in that you don't like?
I just don't know enough to say because most of the purported savings are target numbers that they're going to have to sit down and talk about. I can't say that I would not, I can't say that I would. If it remains just sort of set up a process to talk about cuts, then no, I wouldn't support it.
Any other questions? We're going to wrap up real quick, but one last one right here, maybe.
I'm willing to stipulate that not raising the debt limit would be a catastrophe. I think there's another catastrophe that Mr. Lidwin you're ignoring. And by the way, I'd like also to point out that you keep saying you're not in Congress and that the president don't get too much credit for job creation. But yet you keep arguing that. I'd like you to address that, why these charts that are factual, you ignore those while you keep bringing up.
Clinton was the biggest job. Clinton was the biggest job creator.
The catastrophe we're looking at is the possibility that we're going to keep spending money. And the Gang of Six is offering something that includes spending more money. I see a greater catastrophe there. We're going to have an immediate catastrophe if we raise the debt ceiling. We're going to die a slow death. Henry Morgenthau, the Secretary of Treasury in the Depression, said we spend more and more and more. We've never spent this much money in our this is in the late 30s, he said this. We've got more unemployment than ever before and an enormous debt to boot. We're headed down that path, and I don't think this president can get us out of that. If we continue down this path, we're going to see a much greater catastrophe.
Thanks for your question. I think I was trying to be gracious when I made the comment that since Bill Clinton had the best job producing record of any president in the post-World War II era, that to give him credit for doing that would not be particularly fair. And since George W. Bush had the worst, I said to blame him for that would not be particularly fair either. So I'm not sure how you think that I was trying to be sort of semi-gracious.
In 30 seconds or less, Clinton was the fortunate inheritor of the economic framework established by Ronald Reagan. Reagan's tax rate cuts and general light touch on the economy set in motion a nearly uninterrupted economic boom with a slight dip in the Bush senior recession. Clinton's, no Mike, this is factual, you see if you remember. Clinton's economic numbers were headed downward. The prospects were very bleak when it looked like he and Hillary were going to take over healthcare and the economy. And when things really kicked back into gear was after the '94 election and the change of Congress. It looked like we'd have sane regulatory and fiscal policy. And then the Clinton boom really took off, which was really just the continuation of the Reagan boom.
That's a theory. You're not an economist either, I believe. You haven't said that yet, like I have. What did you get in economics? Very good.
One more question? Two more?
I got an A in logic. that help?
All right, we'll try to control. You guys have been patient.
My name is Jeff Crump. We have watched the stimulus package that was supposed to save the economy and keep unemployment from going above 8%. Well, it obviously failed. Apple announced today that they're sitting on $70 billion in cash. You've got the private sector sitting on cash because of instability, insecurity. They don't know where tax rates are going to go. We're the second highest tax corporate tax country behind Japan in the industrialized world. They're worried about regulations. Why would anybody buy bonds in the car company if the federal government can just decide your bonds are worthless and we're going to turn the assets over to the Indians? My point is, you both have a little different view on how to stimulate productivity. I think we'd all agree that productivity would help stimulate the economy. The path I've seen in the last 2.5 years has shown nothing to stimulate the private sector, which is where creativity happens. You want to take a shot at how we're going to stimulate the economy and get it going again to create those jobs?
Well, you have to remember, we had a disaster in 2008. I mean, a disaster, right?
Yeah. By the way, the 2009 budget was passed by a Democrat House and a Democrat Senate.
It was signed by George W. Bush. So I mean, if you can't blame Obama on one hand and then not blame Bush on the other, right? Yeah.
Obama got the budgets he asked Pelosi Reed for.
I understand your point.
George Bush was dealing with the budgetary
He couldn't have-
product
he
of an
couldn't-
opposition Congress. Obama.
So he couldn't have vetoed the bill.
Oh, he has tools he could, and some conservatives wish he would have used, but I'm saying it's a different dynamic, which is a fair point.